The Fountain of Youth. On the top of a high hill sat a small wooden house. The doors and windows were dusty and broken, and it was, for want of a better word, wonky. Alice and Max were 10. They'd been friends since being born in the same hospital and were an adventurous pair. Some might say troublemakers, but they were kind and curious, and what's so wrong about that? One particularly hot and humid afternoon, they were hiding from the sun beneath a giant pine tree when Max saw something rather unexpected. "Alice, look!" Max was pointing up at the wonky house on the hill on the other side of Three Pines Valley. Alice shaded her eyes from the sun and squinted. She could make out a man standing in the front garden while a little girl played in the nearby flower bed. "So what?" said Alice, lying back down. It was too hot to get excited about anything. "What do you mean, so what?" said Max, staring at Alice in disbelief. "That's him!" "It can't be," said Alice, leaning up on her elbows. "What if it's all true?" Max jumped up and ran to his bicycle that lay on its side in the parched grass. "Max, where are you going?" "I'm going to find out. Coming?" Alice beamed. "I'm coming," she replied excitedly and ran to her bike. Off they rode, their heads full of questions as they followed the winding path that led down, down, down into the steep valley and up, up, up the other side to the wonky house at the crest of the hill. They ditched their bikes at the rusted garden gate and trudged up the dusty path to the house, which was even wonkier close up. The faded roof tiles were all facing different directions. The front porch leaned heavily to one side, and the old paint was slowly trying to escape, peeling itself away from the warped wooden beams. Max marched right up to the man digging the flower beds, passing the little girl who was happily pulling out weeds and throwing them onto the lawn, singing a sweet, familiar tune. "Are you him?" said Max nervously, his hands thrust firmly in the long pockets of his blue shorts. The man looked up and smiled. "Well, everyone is someone," he said, smiling. "So I suppose I could be him. It depends on who you mean." The little girl stopped singing and weeding and planted her earth-covered hands on her hips. Alice could tell that her dress was made from the finest material, and at one time was probably a party dress, but it was now faded and dusty. But the little girl had confidence, and she somehow made it look completely stylish. She stared at Max, and then at Alice. The man looked over at the little girl, and she looked back at him and nodded. He then dug his shovel into the dry earth and left it there as he turned and walked back up to the house. Max and Alice watched in silence as the little girl followed the man up the steps and across the large front porch, brushing the soil off her hands as she walked. "Lemonade?" shouted the man without looking back. Alice and Max looked at each other, their eyes as wide as dinner plates. They raced up the front lawn, tumbled up the wooden steps and onto the uneven floorboards of the porch. Alice looked out over the valley. She had never seen it from this side before. It looked strangely familiar, but at the same time oddly different, like a toy train set or a child's model, tiny and perfect. It made her smile. "That's my home," she thought. The large window on the front porch was open, and a slight breeze blew the net curtains up to reveal a house that was full of light. Sunshine streamed in to reveal a light blue armchair that had seen better days. It looked lived in but clean. The wooden floorboards were scuffed and worn, and Alice decided that it was a happy home. There was warmth and the countless picture frames that filled the walls. The man waved toward a small two-seater porch swing by the front steps, and Alice and Max sat down, rocking gently as if they were suddenly at sea. The man sat opposite them in a dusty white cane chair that creaked noisily when he moved. Max was staring at the man, and Alice wondered if her friend might burst with all the excitement. A small smile seemed to live permanently at the corners of the man's mouth as he looked out over the valley and took a large breath of air before sighing loudly. He had thick, dark hair and a healthy tan and was around her father's age. Alice felt that something about him was familiar, but she couldn't place it. He seemed quite different to all of the other grown-ups she knew, so calm and happy. Alice noticed that Max was staring at the man and knocked his knee. "Stop being weird." "Sorry about Max. He's just excited. My name is Alice. You have a lovely home." The man nodded with thanks. And lucky for me, there was a lot of adventure to be had. After a long time, this still is a magical place. There's so much joy, and some in this house, yes. I built it, you know, said the man, looking proudly at the house. From the foundations, right up to the roof. Brick by brick, tile by tile. Every floorboard was cut and laid by me. It was hard work, but it was worth it. Alice and Max looked around, too. The man noticed Max was frowning, and he laughed. "I know, Max. The wallpaper is peeling at the corners, and it could use a little sprucing up, but there's more to a home than that. This still is a magical place. There's so much joy, and some sadness, of course, that has happened within these four walls." "Like what?" asked Max. "Everything," said the Max. "Sorry, where was I? Yes, so after a trip back to Puerto Rico, I decided to make Florida my new home. It was my idea, you know, the name. Well, it was then that I met my wife, Mary. As soon as our eyes locked at that spring dance, we knew we would be together forever. And we will be, I hope." "Mary, your wife? Is she here too?" Alice asked quietly. "Oh, yes, said the man. "Yes, sorry, I thought you knew that already. My memory is not what it used to be." Alice smiled. "Mum says I'd lose my head if it wasn't screwed on." "Excuse me, sir," said Max, "but how old are you?" "That's a good question, Max, and I know what you're getting at." Max's eyes were wide with anticipation. "I am 136, 37. Max's face lit up with a broad smile. He turned to Alice and nudged her in the side. "I told you," he said smugly. Alice wanted to know more. "But please, sir, you look about my dad's age, and he's only 37. Not 137. "Well, that's the interesting part, and I'm just guessing here, but I think young Max might know a little bit about that." Max nodded manically before blurting out, "You're going to live forever!" Alice had heard the stories too. "Is that true, mister?" she asked. The man tilted his head from side to side and pulled a grimace. Well, there's some truth in it." "I told you," said Max. "Stop saying 'I told you,'" said Alice. "It's very annoying." She turned to the man. "Please, sir, carry on with your story." "Well, we lived a long life, Mary and I, and as we reached our senior years, around 80 or so, I think, long time ago now, Anyway, we heard stories about the Fountain of Youth, blurted Max. Precisely so, young Max. And with nothing to lose, and time running out, we wanted more time together on this earth. So I started looking into it. Max couldn't contain himself any longer. They say if you drink from the fountain, you'll live forever. You drank from it, didn't you? Well, it depends on how much you drink, said the man, looking very serious all of a sudden. After a long time searching and nearly giving up a few times, I finally found it. I knew it, said Max. Alice tutted loudly and shook her head. I found some carvings in the nearby caves and found a map passed down from the ancient local tribes. It took me a bit of time, but yes, I found it and drank from the well. That was a good day. Alice couldn't believe what she was hearing. So you and Mary drank the water and became young again. It's so romantic. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that, but yes, that's the gist of it, I suppose, said the man. I drank first, and by the way, it tasted disgusting, but as you can see, it worked. So I went home, and I brought Mary back with me to the fountain to drink from it too. Because what's the point of a long life if there's no one to share it with? Oh, that's such a lovely story, said Alice. You will grow old together. Again, I mean. The man shook his head. Well, Alice, that's what we thought, but I think we will always be this age now. Mary and I don't seem to have aged in about 50 years, so we're pretty much stuck at the age we are. That's so cool. Where is it? The fountain? This is something I shall never tell, young Max, the man replied sadly. I believe its magic is too powerful. But you drank it. It worked, said Max, frowning. Well, the man hesitated. The front door opened and the little girl walked out onto the porch with a huge tray, 2 glasses of freshly squeezed lemonade, and a plate stacked with the most delicious-smelling homemade cookies. Alice took a large gulp of lemonade. Delicious, thank you, she said to the little girl. Hi, I'm Alice. This is Max. Nice to meet you, Alice, the girl replied with a smile. I'm Mary.